how's it going? So I'm kind of having just a lazy Sunday, and I thought I'd do a little pop-up class for some herbal quick stop because my adult son asked me to make some more for him. I thought, hey, I've never shown anybody how to do this. So I'm recording this live on Instagram. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's a recording of a live. But I do that so it can be put on my Instagram and then upload it to my YouTube. Okay, so I'm waiting for people to roll in, and we are going to do a little pop-up class about this. There's some people here so we can get started. So first of all, what is herbal quick stop? Some people call it quick clot, you know. Really it's just a way that if you cut yourself doing whatever random thing you're doing on accident, you can stop some superficial bleeding and maybe, you know, give yourself some time if you need to go to the hospital if it's that bad. This is so easy to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is get myself some Kaolin Clay. It needs to be Kaolin Clay. I don't want you to use bentonite clay. I don't want you to use Fuller's Earth. I don't want you to use anything but Kaolin Clay. If you want to get really fancy, you can buy pharmaceutical grade, which is called USP grade Kaolin Clay, but any cosmetic grade Kaolin Clay will work as well. And then I'm going to use some Yarrow Powder and some Cayenne powder. Now, Kaolin Clay is really awesome because it has this massive absorbency capacity, meaning the little like clay structure swells up. So if you slice yourself, you can be like, oh shit, and put this on there, and what happens is the clay actually swells up and blocks the capillaries. Get it? And now I make this for my adult son a lot. And I always have to say adult because, like, I'm going to start telling you how he, like, smashed his finger, scoped himself in the eye, and you'd be like, he's almost 20, has his own apartment, job, all that kind of stuff. Been independent, just kind of kid his whole life, and fun things get you hurt. So he's like, hey, Mom, I need some more quick stops, so I'm going to make that for him. So I'm going to use a little jar. This is a pint jar. You can use quart jar, whatever size you want. I'm going to put 1 cup, just 1 cup of the Kaolin Clay. Wrong. I was like, should have seen if that cup fit. So that's about 1 cup of Kaolin Clay. Now you could just use Kaolin Clay. You could just have this Kaolin Clay on hand, and when you cut yourself, this clay will do the trick. It really will. But you know me, some of you do. I like to add herbs in things and like really kick it up. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1/4 cup of powdered yarrow. Yarrow is really fantastic. She has powerful styptic actions, meaning she is literally going to stop the bleeding. In fact, she's been used for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, like the Romans literally had people grow her in mass. That way they could like shove it into wounds to stop bleeding. Yarrow is amazing for stopping bleeding, but also killing gram-positive bacteria on contact. Kaolin Clay doesn't do that. Kaolin Clay is not really going to kill any bacteria. She's more about swelling up and stopping the bleeding, whereas Yarrow has styptic properties to her, particular compounds like phenols and things like that, that actually stop the bleeding but kill bacteria too. And then, and this is the part people are going to be like, what? I want you to add a tablespoon of cayenne pepper. Not chili powder, cayenne pepper. This is going to burn, but cayenne is amazing for stopping bleeding. If I sliced myself and I didn't have any of this on hand, I would just grab cayenne and put it on there. It burns like a bitch for like a solid 2 or 3 minutes, but eventually the pain actually stops because it overwhelms your nerve endings and your brain's like, oh, stop sending signals, and then you don't feel the pain anymore. But I like to add all 3 together because they all do like synergistic actions, right? We're going to swell up and stop the bleeding with the Kaolin Clay. We're going to have a cat fight in the background. And then we're going to have the styptic and antibacterial actions of the yarrow, and we're going to have the blood stopping capacity and pain relieving capacity of the cayenne. And so I put all 3 of those in a jar, and I'm going to shake it. And you know, it's mainly just kaolin, but how easy is that? So now this is just Kaolin Clay, Yarrow Powder, and cayenne. If you don't have Yarrow Powder, no big deal. If you don't have, you know, Cayenne, no big deal, but you have to have the Kaolin. You can't use a different type. Now, of course, if you were bleeding and you just had Cayenne, by all means, or if you just had Yarrow Powder, by all means. But now let me tell you how we've used this in the past. So, this last spring, my dad and my son were fixing a whole tire assembly on my tractor, and they had to take a gasket off and replace the whole gasket. It was leaking out, and he had to take the whole thing off, and my dad's like, "You got it?" And Jaden was like, "Yeah." And then he didn't have it. It was much heavier than he realized. The whole thing fell off at once, and it pinned his finger. It went with like a 200, or well, probably like 100-pound, 80-pound. It was heavy, and it was blooding everywhere. And he comes in like he normally does. He's like, "Mom," and I'm like, "Okay, take a breath." And I grabbed the Quick Clot out of, this is what it's not actually Quick Clot, but that's like a brand name of stuff. But I grabbed my herbal Quick Stop, Quick Clot, and I just smack it on there, and I, pressure, hold it above your head. And it was pretty gnarly. I got to stop bleeding in about 3 to 4 minutes, but it was bad enough that I was like, let's go see if you crushed any bones, right? Because it's like right on the joint. We get to the hospital, and they're like, it must not be that bad, because it would be bleeding much worse if it had got, and I was like, just do the fucking x-ray, see if he crushed his bone, right, see what's going on there. And they're like, well, I don't understand why it's not bleeding. And I'm like, I put Quick Clot in it, right? And they're like, oh, well, we see this stuff on there. And they're like, oh. And what's funny is they're like, you shouldn't put stuff on them. I was like, do you guys use like the blood stop packs for injuries? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, that's made out of Kaolin, right? It's literally made out of Kaolin. You can go on Amazon right now and buy like some crazy expensive medical grade Quick Stop, and the only thing it is USP Kaolin. It's just clay, right? And so now, if I was like really like shot or like stabbed or something, like a fucking wolf attacked me or something like that, yeah, I'm going to go to the hospital. But you can do things like apply a tourniquet and some of your homemade herbal Quick Clot and stop that bleeding from being as bad until you get there. Now, another time, and I remind you, he's an adult, a cartridge in his gun it misfired, right? And that blows like gas compression out of the side. It was a big deal. He was like, that was, horrible, and these things happen, but, he knows gun safety, so, like, nobody got hurt besides him. But anyhow, it hamburgered the shit out of his hand, like, because the gas went poof, right? Old gun. And, long story short, he comes in, he's like, Mom! And I'm like, oh, fuck! He shot himself right until we realized what happened. And sure enough, this stopped some pretty crazy bleeding in about 2 minutes. One time he scope checked himself. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's when you're shooting and you've got your eye too close to the scope you're looking for, and when you shoot, it kicks and it fucking checks you. Now, if you've ever cut yourself on the head, you know that it bleeds like crazy because it's so close to all the capillaries. So he's like, and I'm like, oh my God, child, it ages me so much. But I put that quick stop on there and then cleaned it off and did a couple butterfly band-aids, and he's got a cool scar. But I mean, he's always cutting himself fishing, if he's wood carving, if he's out looking for rocks, just being an outside active, like, sports and hunting type kid. So I'm like, yeah, man, I'll make you another jar. This and Yarrow tincture, he always has that on hand too. But yeah, that is so easy, and it's so good to have on hand. I mean, and how crazy easy was that? You are absolutely smart enough to put some clay, some cayenne, and some yarrow in a jar and go like that. And then let's say you aren't, blowing your hand up or cutting yourself in the face. Let's say you cut yourself cooking. You can literally just grab this and put it on there. And if it's just your jar or just whatever, it doesn't matter. Just stick your finger... depending on how bad it is. Now, I'll use it on my animals too. I've used it especially like with my milk goats. One, I got her when she was grown, and they had disbudded her horns incorrectly, so they like kind of grew in but didn't. They get loose and they bleed sometimes, and I'm just like, come here, Betty. And I put the Quick Clot on there, and it stops it from bleeding, because there's nothing I can do. You can't fix what they messed up, right? But just in general, having this on hand is super easy to make, super affordable to access. You don't have to buy a pound of clay. You could make a ton of it, right? But if you are a person that likes to be prepared for accidents, I would make some of this herbal quick stop. I would buy myself a decent brand tourniquet, because you never know how bad it is, and just have these things on hand, right? Again, if you're very severely injured, you need to go to the hospital. But if you, like me, live a solid 45 minutes away from, like, at the time it used to be worse, like the third worst ranked hospital in the US, you might want to have the capacity to slow things down or handle the situation a little bit yourself until you can get to whatever help might be available to you. So the clay, somebody said, how do I spell it? It's Kaolin. Kaolin? Yes, Kaolin. Kaolin. I might have spelled it wrong. Someone will correct me if I did. But you can get USP grade, which just means that it's standardized to pharmaceutical production. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but if you want to feel better about whatever you're using, or you can just buy some cheapo cosmetic grade white kaolin clay. Don't get any of the rose kaolins or the green kaolins, make sure it's white. And then you can get, you know, Yarrow powder, Cayenne powder. Now again, you don't have to use the Yarrow or the Cayenne. You could just use the clay, but if you want to kick it up a notch and make it stop bleeding a little bit faster, I do suggest, because if not, you're just relying on kaolin's capacity to swell up and block the capillaries or the veins that you've sliced. It made me feel creepy. Or you can use the Cayenne, which will stop it, like basically kind of like cauterizes it with heat in a way. It's not like you're actually burning yourself, but then the Yarrow has the added capacity of being a styptic powder, so I feel like they go together really well. But yeah, that was so easy to do, and you are so capable of doing this. The next thing I need to do is write quick stop on here, because he ends up with all kinds of jars of all kinds of things from mom. And you want to know which one you're grabbing. You're not like, oh, I wonder if that's the whatever seasoning. No, it's not. It's where when you catch yourself fucking around and doing something that got you hurt. So yes, you apply it dry, and you might have to apply it a couple times depending on how bad you're bleeding, but applying it dry with pressure is fantastic, right? And then you might have to put it on a few times. You can put it under a bandage. Usually after the bleeding has stopped, you'll want to use some cool water to rinse it off in like 4 or 5 hours. You don't want to try to rinse it off too soon, because the water will make you start bleeding again, right? You want your body to have time to do its thing and heal the wound a little bit and stop the bleeding on its own. So this is just kind of like, you know, helping you get things under control. Now, again, it's going to burn a little bit from the Cayenne, but that will stop. And then, you know, the Yarrow in there is going to help it stop bleeding and all that stuff too. And this will last a long time. This will probably last him, well, it depends. Depends on what he gets up to, but it'll probably last him about 6 months to a year for that amount, I hope, right? We also, does it have to be washed out later? Yeah, you'll want to just rinse it under some cool running water or saline solution, whatever you happen to have on hand. But for anybody who likes to be prepared, this is something that I would make and have a lot of. And it doesn't really go bad, right? It's not going to go bad sitting there on the shelf. I wouldn't even consider the herbal properties waning, because you're not really after it for the deeper properties so much as the more prominent terpenes and such that tend to have a very long shelf life. And so that was just 1 cup of kaolin clay, 1/4 cup of yarrow powder, and 1 tablespoon of cayenne pepper. I mean, you can play around with the amount. I wouldn't go, I would make sure that it had, you know, the 1 cup to 1/4 for the yarrow powder. You don't want to go much past that, because you want to make sure that there is enough clay to do the swelling action, which blocks the little capillaries and things that are bleeding. So that's my pop-up class about herbal styptic powder. And remember, you are completely smart enough to do this. That is so easy. You can be prepared for kitchen wounds or teenage wounds or whatever you get up to that makes you end up accidentally hurting yourself. This is just handy to have on hand. You can use it on little ones all the way up. Now the young ones are going to scream because they don't want the pain, but if it stops the bleeding, that's more important. If you like my pop-up classes and you're watching on Instagram, make sure to come find me on YouTube. If you're watching the replay on YouTube, make sure to come and find me on Instagram. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share. Sharing is really important because it helps other people realize that they're smart enough to do this too, and they also deserve to like have a jar in case you cut yourself, quick stop herbal powder in their cupboard. And if you want to support my existence and my capacity to teach freely and do these pop-up classes and just be a human with you, consider following the link in my bio to my shop if you're on Instagram, or checking out the description in the video if you're watching on YouTube. I only exist by the things that I offer in my shop. So everything you call home helps me teach you freely. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you next time, folks. Bye.